everyone, welcome in. My name is Everetta, and this lively pile of bones next to me is my bestie Maury. In this video, we're bringing you more Hunt Showdown lore. With the game having been out for several years now, there's been a lot of lore introduced to the game over time. However, sadly, with recent updates, most of the lore can no longer be accessed within the actual game itself. And if you go looking for it online, you're probably going to have to go to several different websites. Even then, it's hard to find it in chronological order. So, for all the new players joining Hunt that want to know what the heck is going on story wise, or for seasoned players that want a refresher, I got you. We're going clear back to the beginning of Hunt lore. The first pieces of lore we received in Hunt were titled the Louisiana Event. This was a collection of information and research compiled into a folder by an unknown researcher well after the era that the game takes place in. In fact, the date on the front of the folder shows the year 1967. So the assumption is that the events that happened in the game are swept under the rug and kept from history until a researcher stumbled onto them in 1967. However, there's another document in the file that has 1977 written on it, so it's unclear when this discovery is taking place or how many layers there are to it. First inside the folder are newspaper clippings of the, at the time, Louisiana Governor Murphy J. Foster addressing the recent rumors and fears of a potential epidemic, stating there are reports of an epidemic, a plague, if you will, concerning populace deep in the bayou. I refer to this as flagrant speculation. The people affected by this are no doubt of a low creed. It is not uncommon for their sort to be affected by maladies which we superior men do not need fear. Claiming such a thing as an epidemic is therefore not but a misinterpretation of their natural state. This being the case, calls to close the port of New Orleans will go unheard. Good, God-fearing folk have my assurance that there is nothing to fear. The newspaper goes on to state that they traced the sources of some of the rumors and found them to be based on the ramblings of the criminally insane, practitioners of voodoo, women afflicted by mania, and the idle poor. Following this article are various other newspaper clippings from different locations around the United States. One from Massachusetts describes the invention of basketball, another from Washington, D.C., talking about President Cleveland, and more from places like Texas, Pennsylvania, Illinois, Georgia, and of course, Louisiana. All of them seem mundane, except for the one from Louisiana that talks about a new bout of yellow fever that has broken out in the area, claiming 100 citizens over the last several months, and shows no signs of slowing down. It also mentions that this outbreak could be the first since the devastation of 1878, and is another sorry chapter in the history of a city which has already sorely suffered. Now, for those unaware of the history, this is an actual historical event that took place in the US. In 1878, there were a lot of cases of yellow fever in the Caribbean, and in particular, Cuba. Many refugees came from there to New Orleans after the War of Independence from Spain. The Quarantine Act of 1878 gave the Marine Hospital Service the responsibility to stop the spread of diseases coming from sailors and ships. And while there was a quarantine station set up to inspect incoming ships to New Orleans, and even fumigated ships before clearing them to dock, it wasn't until after docking that the sailors started showing symptoms and falling ill. In the end, at least 4,600 people died from yellow fever in New Orleans alone, and around 20,000 total throughout the Mississippi Valley, which is why in the game's story there were calls to close the port of New Orleans, so that the city wouldn't get hit with another wave of yellow fever or similar illness. And why would the governor ignore these signs and warnings of things to come? Well, it turns out not only was Murphy J. Foster a real person, but he actually was the governor of Louisiana during the years Hunt's lore takes place. And I gotta tell you, he was a real piece of shit. So this whole scenario in the game is actually really on brand for him. Next in the folder is an article from 1977 discussing the history and evolution of graffiti, stating a Dr. Daniel Klein and his team are currently working on uncovering examples of street art from the late 19th century, adding that the research revealed interesting findings from New Orleans. There's an example of New Orleans graffiti mentioned, and the article explains that although it appears to be unintelligible gibberish, Dr. Klein is convinced there is a method to the madness. This mention of graffiti seems to be introducing the game's Voynich-type text that appears throughout the game, most notably on the special ammo boxes that players affectionately refer to as ooh boxes. Although the actual translation appears to be AHA, which likely stands for the American Hunters Association. But side note, several people from my community and I tried translating what is shown in the image of the newspaper clipping and weren't able to figure it out. It seems like the developers might have used two different ciphers to write it or intentionally made it gibberish. There are other people online claiming it also says AHA, like the ammo boxes, but if you compare the writing, it doesn't match. So if you've cracked the code, please let me know in the comments. But anyway, the special ammo boxes likely mean American Hunters Association. And if you're not sure what that is, we're going to get into that in a moment, because the next letter in the file is written by the leader of the American Hunters Association in 1895, Dr. Philip Huff Jones. The letter is written to Marie Laveau, which is another real person that existed during this time period. She was known for practicing Louisiana voodoo and caring for the sick in her community during the yellow fever epidemic of 1878. So she's another fitting piece to this game's beginning lore. In this letter, Dr. Jones thanks Laveau for writing to him and acknowledges her observation that he wears a mask, so to speak. He explains the reason for this is to maintain the secrecy of the AHA, and by extension, also protecting himself. He goes on to say that a partnership between them would be of benefit to all, and that he'd like to hear more of her visions of the city's end, because his organization has also seen such things. He's unwilling to elaborate on this through writing and requests they meet in person to discuss things further. And it would seem Dr. Jones has been reaching out to multiple people to build partnerships, because the next letter in the file is addressed to him from Victor Caldwell, informing Dr. Jones that the first shipment is on its way. Caldwell goes on to say that the shipment is a bit unusual, containing prototypes of a highly experimental nature, but that he hopes the items will receive the appreciation he believes they truly deserve. And if they do, he will provide him with more. So much more. He ends his letter by referencing what seems to be a prior discussion between them about the evils that follow them both in various forms, and that they must face down their own demons. Though what Dr. Jones faces sounds to be of a particularly vile nature, but they compel their future, and may they both keep a good heart and work together towards their mutual success. So clearly Victor Caldwell is supplying the American Hunters Association with weapons, and as players of the game, we know why these weapons are necessary, but from a lore perspective, all we've learned so far is a potential sickness spreading. So what does Dr. Jones know about this sickness? Well, the document following the Caldwell letter gives us a bit more information on what they're dealing with. It's written by Christopher Palella Jr., who's only mentioned this once in the game's lore, and he starts by saying his suspicions were proven justified today. He received a telegram stating the sickness isn't a simple infection, and that Jones suspects it's a single entity making monsters of men. He continues that they probably have a sculptor on their hands, one that's able to possess and shape multiple people, pointing out that it could, in theory, possess anyone. Therefore, anyone could be the demon and cannot be trusted. However, that also means an endless supply of things to hunt, potentially each having their own contract. That tone of delight at the prospect of hunting and collecting bounties is echoed in a journal entry by Alessandro Gardini, where he describes the addictive nature of hunting. As a skilled hunter, Alessandro has hunted all types of beasts: tigers, crocodiles, even elephants. But none of them satisfied him, because they were all prey to him, too easy to predict. However, now he has learned of a new hunt in New Orleans, one where his skills can be matched. He hopes to impress Dr. Jones so that he can qualify for even better hunting parties in the future. Alessandro explains that the AHA understands what a hunter actually needs. A real hunter needs no prey, for prey, by definition, never hope to win. Therefore, since the hunter would never lose, there's no actual skill involved. Nay, a hunter needs a demon, for lack of a better term. A true hunter needs another true hunter. Let the games begin. Based on the contents of this folder as well as other pieces of lore, we learn that the AHA is a secret organization that has existed for hundreds of years. At the start of the game's lore, they were responsible for recruiting hunters and sending them into the corrupted areas of Louisiana to fight and cleanse the area of monstrous entities, rewarding hunters for bounties they collected on the most demented and deadly creatures. Some hunters took on the risk to save Louisiana from corruption. Others did it for the reward of wealth, and then some did it for the twisted thrill of hunting other people. Now, the rest of the contents in the Louisiana Event folder seem to just be some extra flavor to set the tone. There's a couple of letters from different people talking about their travels to Louisiana. However, these characters don't come up again in the game's lore and don't seem relevant to understanding what's happening in the game's story. There's also some train tickets, which, at a glance, don't seem of importance. However, I did notice one detail. One of the tickets from Cincinnati to New Orleans has the name A. Lynch on it, which at this point in the game's lore wouldn't mean anything to anyone. But later in the story, we'll be introduced to this infamous character. And lastly, there's an ad for a vaporizing inhaler for coughs and asthma, which is fitting for the sickness that's spreading. So from this folder of letters and newspaper clippings, what we're able to piece together is that there is a new epidemic of sorts creeping into Louisiana. While some fear it is another case of yellow fever, it would seem it could instead be a supernatural occurrence by something called a sculptor, an entity controlling people. The American Hunters Association, led by Dr. Philip Huff Jones, has begun looking into this, making connections with other people to stop the corruption, and securing weapons and resources to fight it head on. However, as we continue to dig into Hunt's lore in future videos, we'll quickly discover that stopping the sculptor and its corruption won't be so straightforward. But we'll continue to dig further in the next lore video. Let me know in the comments what Hunt lore you're dying to hear about. If you're new here, please consider subscribing, and don't forget to check out my Twitch channel, where I primarily play solo versus trio matches with chill, cozy vibes. Oh my god! Thank you so much for watching, and remember, always give Racha belly rubs. Goodbye.